I'm Jennifer Sir. Welcome to the Sewing Room and our Jobs in Fashion series. Today we're talking about the job of pattern maker. What is a pattern maker, you might ask? Well, we're going to ask that to Neysa Young, our special guest today. But in short, it's the person who makes the blueprint for the garment. It's the pieces that are used to cut the fabric and assemble it together. There's a lot involved in being a pattern maker, and I'm sure Neysa has a lot to say about it today. So without further ado, here is Neysa. Hi, Neysa. Welcome to the Sewing Room and our Jobs in Fashion series.
Hi, Jennifer. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. I'm excited to talk about being a pattern maker today.
Okay, I'll try to be as informative as possible.
In the fashion world, what exactly is a pattern maker?
Well, the job of a pattern maker is to work with a designer, or they could probably design too, but it's to take a sketch, a photograph, or like a clipping from a magazine, or even just a verbal idea of what the design is, and turn it into a pattern. So the pattern maker is taking it all apart in their brain, and they're either drafting or draping all the components of the pieces that are needed to make that garment.
So have you ever worked with designers who just describe it verbally?
I have. I found that some are very good sketchers, and if they understand patterns, it's even a better or easier relationship working with a designer who understands patterns. But I've worked across the board where someone who's a really good sketcher, someone who would just draw a little very kind of flat pattern, flat sketch, and someone who would just give me clippings from magazines and then talk it through, like saying, well, I like this collar, but I like this sleeve, and so I want to put it together into something that has this feel, and then you have to interpret it into the pattern.
Yeah, that's quite a skill, actually.
Well, you have to be a good communicator in that sense.
Yes, absolutely.
So, yeah, not only do you need the skills for making the patterns, but be able to talk it through with whoever you're working with, because it really becomes a collaboration between you and the designer.
Right, and everybody has to understand proportion and what the idea is behind, what is wanted, and or sort of the interpretation, I think, is the best way to put it. Like, it's because the designer has a certain idea, right, of what they want, and you really do have to interpret it into a 3D experience.
Yeah. And sometimes it takes a little while to work with someone to get a sense of their aesthetic, their sense of proportion, and their customer. So, that's part of the relationship, is just getting to know what the designer wants. Yeah.
Cool. I know you're retired from CCA now, but previously, where did you work, and what was the last position you held, both at CCA and as a pattern maker?
Oh, well, let's see. I held about 5 jobs. I had 5 full-time jobs from the start of my career. And then at the end of that last 5th job, when I got laid off, that's when I started teaching.
Oh, okay.
So when I started teaching, it was only part-time. And so I augmented my work with doing freelance work for smaller local design houses. So I've been doing that for the past I taught for 24 years, and I still continue to work with small design houses that need my help. So you asked me what was the last position I held?
Right, as a full-time pattern maker.
Oh, as a full-time pattern. Well, my 5 full-time jobs were mostly with women's wear, and the last one was children's wear. So it was little girls' dresses, which were really great, and they were fun to work with because the designers also designed the prints for the fabrics, and it was all custom. And then I started teaching, and while I was teaching, like I said, I was working for other smaller companies on a freelance basis. And so, but I enjoyed the teaching aspect of it. It was nice to work with young people who were interested in becoming designers or at least learning about fashion. And it was I liked the mentorship with those students. It was good. And I learned a lot about myself too.
Yeah, you learn a lot when you're
Uh-huh.
teaching other people.
Yeah.
And how did you get started as a pattern maker?
I, let's see, I just applied for a job. I had 2 jobs previous to my first pattern making job. My first job was working as a sample cutter.
Okay.
So I got to see all the patterns and learn the process of how garments were made from design to production. Um, but I had been traveling, and when I had come back, I just needed a job, and there was a company in San Francisco looking for a pattern maker. So I applied for it, and back then they always gave you a test, so I had to go in and make a dress pattern for them, and I guess I passed, so they hired me. And it was I love that job. It was great. I made some really nice friendships, and I learned a lot because a lot of the pattern making at that level, I was pretty much a beginner, but I learned so much more than what I had learned in school. So there's a lot of on the job training.
And what company was that?
It was called Linda Lewis. And I don't know if you remember Joni Char.
I do.
Okay, they were people from Joni Char who started another business that was called Linda Lewis, and we did dresses. They were kind of career dresses.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Great. What kind of training is required to become a pattern maker?
Well, you definitely need to go to school to get the technical training because it's very technical. And so you need to learn the fundamentals. And I have to say, fashion is a very traditional industry. I mean, it's changing a lot, and it has recently, but I mean, the actual training is fairly traditional. So, you have to learn how to, like you're teaching seams and construction, but you also have to have a sense of going from an idea to a 3D garment.
Right.
And so you need to learn the idiosyncrasies of the body, how garments hang on the body, how they fit, and how to correct it. So yeah, so I would say you would need to go to at least a technical trade school or a college that teaches you the technical skills. And then if you were going into a larger company that's wanted to work for a larger company that did everything on computers, then you're going to have that additional training for computer pattern making.
Right. So, where did you go to school?
I went to Diablo Valley College in Pleasant Hill, which is a community college, and they had an apparel design program many years ago, which unfortunately no longer exists. And that's where I got my training. And I didn't have any intentions of actually working in the business, but I found that I enjoyed it, and I had an affinity to it, and I was pretty good at it. So that's how I ended up in the business.
That's awesome. Um, what does a typical day look like in the job of a pattern maker?
Well, you would, I guess, if you had a job, you'd go to work, talk with the designer, and you get your sketch or your idea, and then you get to work. And it's a lot of It's just drafting, or it's not all drafting. You could do what we call flat pattern making, which is the drafting part of it. So you're just on a table drawing it, or if, depending on design or your style of working, it could be draping, which is actually taking fabric and putting it on the dress form and molding it into the shape of the garment that you want. And that can become your pattern when you get it down flat. So you're basically just working on your own for that period of time. And it takes a while to do a pattern. So I would say, say a dress, a full dress from start to finish would take at least 3 hours or so. So, you're at a drafting table most of the day, and people leave you alone because it takes concentration and time, which is kind of nice because you don't get interrupted a lot. And then when you're done with it, then you have to fill out all the information for what the design is, and it gets handed off to someone to cut and sew it.
Right. What is the difference between a pattern maker and a technical designer?
That's a good question. Well, I would say the pattern maker is actually making the initial pattern for the design. So, something simple, you probably may not even need a pattern. You could go with the specs or the measurements of a garment. But most of my work has been working in the first pattern department. So taking the sketch and turning it into an actual pattern. Whereas the technical designer, I would think, is working more with the production end of the pattern. Like after the initial pattern is made, it's cut and sewn, then you have to fit it, then you have to adjust it and make corrections to it. And if necessary, sew it up again and check it again and finalize it. And a technical designer would take it from there. But I could be wrong. It's been a while since I've been did technical design, but I see technical design as more on the production end. So you're dealing with the measurements and all the technical aspects of the garment. You're writing up the dossier for it.
Right. So the pattern maker is really sort of at the beginning part of the process, and maybe the technical designer is sort of midway to the end of the production process in a bigger company.
Yeah, so they're finalizing everything before it goes into like big production.
Right.
Yeah.
Until when everything gets really cut and then really sewn in the factory. Right. Do pattern makers have any influence on how the styles are determined from season to season?
Well, in most companies, probably not directly. Although, I've had jobs where I was designing and then I made the patterns.
Mm-hmm.
But those were smaller companies. So perhaps, you do both. You could be designer and pattern maker.
Right.
But most places have a designer, and then they have a pattern maker, and then they have, the cutter and the sewer, and then the production department. But I think pattern makers can influence the designs in some ways because they, sometimes designers they're just thinking of the design and what they want it to look like, but the pattern maker is the one that's going to say whether it's possible or not.
Right.
It's down to the nuts and bolts of how you're going to get into this garment, like where's the opening and all that kind of thing. And sometimes designers forget about the opening. They just a beautiful sketch and go, well, how are you going to get into it? So that means it's going to require a zipper or an opening somewhere, and that could affect the design. Mm-hmm. And also fit and proportions. So there is a little bit of influence, but I don't think doesn't necessarily have to be a direct influence on the designs. Yeah.
Have you ever been involved in any photo shoots or fashion shows?
Yes. We are at CCA. We had a fashion show every year. So our first fashion show was in 1999. And so we produced a fashion show every year for the senior thesis collections. So yes, I was.
I remember actually.
Uh-huh.
Fashion shows were so much fun, but so much work beforehand for all the
So
students.
much work. Yeah, because we had to do the casting, had to cast all the models. You had to do the fittings on the models.
Mhm.
And when the fashion show actually came, was the day of the fashion show, my job was more of the backstage area. So I was organizing the models, organizing the clothes, getting the racks all in order. Also, we had to figure out what the order of the show is, what we call the run of show, and that took a long time working out which outfit was going to come after the next and what designer was going to show after, or the order of the designers. Yeah, it was fun though. Fashion shows are fun.
Fashion shows are really fun. Did you ever travel for business?
I never had to travel for business. Yeah, I never had a job that did that. I love traveling. So when I would travel, I'd get inspired a lot by traveling, but I never had to do it for work. Yeah, I do it for pleasure.
That's great.
Uh-huh.
And so what are you up to now?
Well, now that I've retired from teaching, but I still have a few clients in the area. And when they need me, I come in and help them do their patterns. So that's what I'm doing. It's slowed down a lot, but people are still coming back. You know, they're still out there and they're coming back and making clothes.
We get lots of interest here in with people asking for pattern makers. Would you like us to send some your way?
um, sure, you could.
Okay.
I
Well,
mean, it'll depend on what they need and if I can help them.
right,
Yeah.
right. Because there's different kinds of pattern makers, and you focus mostly on women's wear, right?
Mostly women's wear. I've done some men's wear and some leather pieces. And of course, I have some experience with children's wear. But yeah, it'll depend on what they what the need is and then of course timing.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Well, Neysa, thank you so much for coming today and talking to us about the job of pattern maker. It was great to learn a little bit more about what that means and give our audience an insight into that type of a job.
Well, thanks for having me. I hope I was helpful and I hope that, I've inspired someone to become a pattern maker.
Well, you certainly inspired me when we worked together at CCA. I loved what you did there with all the
Oh,
students. Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, it was great working with you too. That was a long time ago, but I have fond memories of
Me
that.
too. Me too. Well, have a great day, Neysa.
All right, thanks so much, Jennifer.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.